Thank you. And thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I know there's a Dolphins game on, so uh, they're up against stiff competition. Uh, Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge Books and Books, who has been Books and Books has been a friend of writers here in Miami for a long, long time. In fact, I remember when we were on the corner. So, and also our publisher, People Tree Press, who has been People Tree with Jeremy Pointing and Hannah Bannister. They've been publishing Caribbean writers now for almost 30 years also. So let me dive right into it. The first reader is going to be Sharon Millar, and Sharon is a graduate of the Lesley University MFA program and is a past student of the late Wayne Brown. She is a winner of the 2013 Commonwealth Short Story Book Prize and the 2012 Small Act Short Fiction Award. In 2013, she was also shortlisted for the Holly Carvin Caribbean Writers Prize for Fiction. A past NGC Bocas Lit New Talent Showcase writer, her work has appeared in publications such as Granta, the Manchester Review, Small Axe, and Susumba Book Bag. Her story, The Whale House, was anthologized in Pepper Pot, Best New Stories from the Caribbean. She's a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, where she teaches prose fiction. Sharon will be reading from her latest collection, The Whale House. The stories in this collection range wide, across different ethnic communities, across rural and urban settings, across the moneyed elite and illicit new wealth, and the poor scrabbling for survival. Locals and expatriates, the certainties of rational knowledge, and the mysteries of unseen and the uncanny. Different locations in Trinidad are brought to the present to the reader through a precise and sensuous mapping of the country's fauna and flora. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you for that wonderful, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jeffrey. I'd like to thank Books and Books as well for having me, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. It's great to look out and see such friendly faces. I'm just going to jump in, right in with a story called The Gael, and just give you a little taste of one of these stories. Benita stands parallel to the window. Her body carves a dark silhouette against the outside light, her long neck like a funnel leading down into her belly that holds the baby. If her son Manny squints and looks through shielded eyes, he imagines it floating, womb-bound, only by the thick cord that his mother grows to anchor what grows within. If you fight the cock, it will lose. She makes this declaration with finality. It has come to this because it is now February and the roosters have stopped their molting. Soon the path to the Gael will be smooth and dry. The handlers, thin men like his father, will squat around the pen while the roosters jump and stab with their spurs. In the second week of February, the weather shape shifts in the night. All along the island, thick rivers drink the sea, and at night glow blue under the moon. When they visit his mother's family on the banks of the Ottawa River, sometimes Manny swims in the brown river, throwing the water into the air, beads spreading their inflorescence into the night. His father had a wife before his mother, but she died in childbed. When Manny first heard this term, he imagined his father's first wife climbing into a small bed and dying, as if tiny pillows and soft blankets could choke a grown woman. It was only later that he understood that the babies killed her as they pushed their way to air. They tore her up like an old bed sheet, he heard his mother whisper to his aunt. There had been two babies that lived for less than a week. His father's wife had bled out on the bed. When his mother came, driving herself in the red truck, the tray packed with suitcases, aloe plants, and a ram goat, She'd insisted that the room be blessed before she stepped foot in the house. His father had burnt the bed. The first wife was buried in the big cemetery in Millar, the one that ran beside the road, cresting the hill as you rounded the blind corner, coming out of the forest and moving away from the river. Here she lay, her grave not yet flat but still mounded with soil that has only just begun to lose its freshness, even though it is 9 years old, 1 year older than Manny. Sometimes when they visit, the grave has been decorated with bright red canna lilies that grow wild in the swampy mud of the coast. She was very beautiful, his father's first wife, and her mother is said to be comforted that her daughter can hear the waves when the tide is in. Manny's mother, Benita, is also very beautiful. Some say she is more beautiful than her cousin, but Manny cannot say because there are no photographs of his father's first wife. The babies lie under the silk cotton tree on the Sangre Chiquito estate, just out of line of sight of the house. Manny's father dug the graves himself. How Manny knows these things he cannot say. The stories grow with him, stretching and changing as easily as his skin. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you. Okay, I'll hand over to Jeffrey. Okay, well actually I'd like to introduce Keith. Keith Jardim, who's here as well to read with me. Keith and I were going to have a conversation as well. So I'd like to, hi. It's okay. It's okay. I was just doing a small introduction of Keith, but perhaps you can take over, yeah? Okay, thanks. Okay.
I didn't know you were going to read that short. All right. Keith Jardim is from Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. His stories have appeared in many publications, including Mississippi Review, Kaiko Varal, the Antigonish Review, Trinidad and Tobago Review, Atlanta Review, Short Story, Wasafiri, Denver Quarterly, Journal of Caribbean Studies, Global Village, and Trinidad Noir. In 2008, he was invited to read at the 10th International Short Story Conference in Cork, Ireland. He has a BFA and an MFA in Literature and Writing from Emerson College in Boston, a PhD from the University of Houston's Creative Writing and Literature program, and is currently Assistant Professor of English Literature and Creative Writing at Gulf University for Science and Technology in Kuwait. Keith will be reading from Near Open Water. These stories present in writing that is both meticulous and poetic, a Caribbean world of unparalleled natural beauty, and societies that seethe on the edge of chaos, where crime encompasses both the rulers and the ruled, and where representatives of the state are as out of control as the youth, Cynthia, witnesses hacking off the hand of an old woman in a casual robbery. We enter this world through the perceptions of both those struggling for survival at the base of society and the members of the old elite facing the consequences of past privilege in the reality of present insecurity. These stories stare hard into the abyss, at times taking us to hallucinatory places where nothing is certain. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Keith.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Again, thank you very much, and also to Books and Books, and thank you all for coming. All right, I am just decided what to read. It's been a very difficult process, and I'm not sure where I will stop, but I'll probably read as long as Sharon, so we can have a nice chat with Jeffrey. This is from a story I quite like, very much. It's called The Jaguar, and there's an epigraph from, I imagine it must be thousands of years old, hundreds of years old, but it comes from the Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. I would like to be the jaguar of your mountains and take you to my dark cave. Open your chest there and see if you have a heart. Mid-afternoon sunlight filtered through the silk cotton tree and onto the jaguar. The cat, a big male, moved in an unbroken rhythm back and forth along the cage, whiskers almost brushing the dark iron bars. The end of the jaguar's thick tail looped up a bit. His jaws were parted for the heat, and his tongue, tip curled to the roof of his mouth, floated over and under the air he sucked in and expelled with light gasps. Roy watched Fiona lean over the waist-high fence 6 feet from the cage, stretching her back and neck toward the animal. He noted the ridges of her spine through her thin cotton top, and when the top slid above her jeans, he saw the smooth, pale skin, the tiny footprints of freckles making their way down, he knew, to run across the right side of her hip, then up again, fading around her breast in a splotchy sunset like a birthmark disintegrating. Just above her hip, reaching for the back of her rib cage, was the bruise where he had gripped her last night while making love. It was blue-black and purple tinged like some fleshy parts inside the jaguar's mouth. Fiona stared directly into the jaguar's eyes when it turned at the corner of its small, square cage. The cat stopped, assessed Fiona's new position, and returned her gaze with such stillness and gravitas, eyes unblinking in its steady, large head, muscles tensed as if to throw himself through the cage, the fence, and onto her, that she straightened, stepped back, and took Roy's arm. She tucked some loose strands of light brown hair behind her ear. Why do you suppose he reacted like that? She asked, her blue eyes startled. The jaguar resumed strolling back and forth along the sunlit edge of its cage. A fence sign gave the range of jaguars in the New World, and this one's name, Lollipop. No other information was available. Maybe he likes you, Roy said, still brooding over a tense conversation they'd had last night. Maybe you got too close, like with D'Souza. She released his arm, but he was more beautiful than ever when he did that. Fiona's eyes were bright. Really? Roy frowned. The confines of the jaguar's cage troubled him. It was cruelty, pure and simple. He jingled the car keys in his pants pocket. How do you suppose he'd look if he were a man? Roy was a little taller than Fiona, but they were on an incline with Fiona upslope, so she was able to lower her head a bit, look Roy straight in the face, and ignore him. Bet you'd want to interview him too. You are beginning to whine, dear, she said in the playful voice she'd used earlier to deflate last night's tension. It's time we visited the monkeys. Roy followed, feeling as if she were talking to a slightly troubled child. She half spun to face him, giving her dazzling, genuine smile. He tried to resist, agitated that she could so easily change his mood. Her smile, as natural to her as brooding was to him, made a music in his head, the merry, witty violins of Ireland, her childhood home. Fiona laughed, an amused appraisal of the situation perhaps, or maybe she was nervous. He glimpsed the inside of her mouth, her pink tongue, and was almost undone. Come, she said. Come along, Jaguar man. She took his hand, and making deliberate eye contact, said, Roy, I'd never compromise myself like that. D'Souza is a creep, so forget it, all right? He wasn't convinced. D'Souza was a persuasive man. He wanted Fiona close by and had encouraged her to interview him. He had warned Roy that perhaps she was not a journalist for the BBC. Possibly, based on routine scrutiny, Fiona was involved in surveillance work. An elderly man with a scruffy beard, slim and shirtless, approached, walking purposefully up from the alligator pond. He wore a bright purple scarf, loose khaki shorts, and laceless grey shoes. Halting a few feet from them, he fingered his scarf, then crossed his long brown arms. His longish hair was matted, with dusty, sun-browned patches that would soon grow into clumps. He smelled of sweat and earth, but it was not unpleasant. His arms were decorated with silver watches, strapped tightly from wrists to elbows. I think I'll stop there. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, this is where I get to play interlocutor. So, by way of introduction, let me ask, Which which Caribbean and non-Caribbean writers inspired you and why?
That's an interesting question. I think, in large part, I have to acknowledge the influence of Alice Munro, early Margaret Atwood, because I went to boarding school in Canada. So these were the first female, writers that I was really, really exposed to. And I still think that I do write very much in that sort of vein, I'm conscious of that. But I have to acknowledge Earl Lovelace as well. I think that Earl, what Earl does with characters, I'll go back and I'll look at, all the time. There's a story, it's George and the Bicycle Pump. And I actually teach that story. And I go back and I go over that story over and over and over and over again. Just, to show, because it's a very good example of what Earl is able to do with character, and so I think I use that as a template. Naipaul is there, has to be.
Of course.
Has to be. And I think just clarity, clarity in language with Naipaul, so right. That's it. Yeah, Keith?
Lovelace, I think of his Shoemaker Arnold story. That is one I really love teaching as well. And Naipaul, of course, and in particular Shiva Naipaul for me. And of course Walcott. And not to run on too long, but some overseas writers like Catherine Mansfield, Paul Bowles, people like that. And I agree with a lot of Sharon's choices as well.
Bowles, why?
Paul Bowles. He's a very strange writer, and I picked up a book of his actually in Trinidad. Oddly enough, was the first place I ever came across Paul Bowles at a mall somewhere near. Where was it? Where the it used to be a nightclub, and they a part of it now. It's a big car insurance place. It's near just before you get onto the highway when you're heading east.
Barataria. Barataria roundabout.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, chiming in. Sorry.
And it was The Sheltering Sky, the novel The Sheltering Sky, and this was before the movie ever came out. And then I was on my way to Boston shortly after that, and I picked up on him there. But he's very strange. He's written about the Caribbean. He's written about the Middle East, Latin America, all these places. And he was a man who just rejected America completely and totally at a very early age, and never went back until very late in life. So he's a bit of an oddball and strange, but he writes really, again, clarity, like Naipaul, the clarity.
I just wanted to say one last thing. I think I would be remiss as well in not mentioning, when I was actually doing this particular collection, I do think you become intoxicated by one writer. I don't know if it's the same for every work, because this is my first collection, but I think you develop almost an intoxication. And there's a short story, well, she writes novels as well, but there's a writer called Andrea Barrett. She's an American writer. And she was the first person that really showed me what I could do with landscape. I really looked at what she did with landscape and how she manipulated landscape and color and texture and all that. And I think that there was an intoxication that really, it was quite a remarkable thing, actually. So that's it.
I got a note here that I can hang on to the microphone. So, what drew you to the short story form?
You want to take it? All right, I'll take it. Of course, I don't have. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Naturally, I might. Duh. I think the short story form is. I'll be completely honest. I love short stories. As I say, I adore, Alice Munro, like the rest of the world. But when you go to do an MFA, I think this is something that it has to be acknowledged. When you go to do an MFA, you arrive in the MFA program and you say, right, I'm here to do a novel. And they say, great, more power. So we'll start you off with some short stories, you know, and then that's what happens. You find then you really learn how to, manage the form. And I mean, I'm very comfortable in the short story form. I like to drive it. I like to push it. I like to stretch it. I know what I can do with it. It's a very, very, it's a very tight form. But I guess you grow to manage it, to really love what you can do with it. I'm just working on my first novel, and that's a completely different animal. So we'll see. Let's hope I can make the transition.
That I feel the same way, pretty much. I think I actually, because I'm well into a novel now, about 45,000 words, and it's a fragmented beast at the moment, which I think is natural, because I think we come out of a very fragmented place, and I really like the short story form as well, and it's definitely not a form, a thing I'm going to leave alone. I'm definitely going to go back to it, and I have gone back to it. But you're in a small space and you have to make something work, and you have to make it interesting, and you have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of space, and you have a limited amount of characters as well, and it has to have, as they say, one thread, and you have to take it down an interesting path or weave or whatever. But it's challenging in a way that the novel isn't. But the novel of course requires other things.
What other things?
More plot, for one. And you have to have a sense of, well, how much plot do you need and how much plot do you don't want to. The novel is this might not make sense, but it's more work but less concentration.
Okay.
If that doesn't quite make sense, but that's what I'm feeling now. That's what I'm feeling now.
Do you work from an outline, or do you fly blind?
I like to fly blind with the stories. I usually have an idea in my head, but the novel, I have a few ideas, and I'm flying towards something which may just turn out to be nothing, so it might change into something else. But it's exciting in that way.
Sharon?
Novel, I mean, I think from what I've found with the novel so far, and it's still embryonic, but you can write long, you have the ability to write to see where you go, because I'm a very slow worker. I really admire people that can just churn out stories. My stories are layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, and I have to write myself to the center of a story, and that takes time. So with a novel, I appreciate the ability to, you have the length, you have the time, you have the room to really expand, and I find that there's a lot more room for discovery. Okay. That you can say, okay, I didn't see that coming. But I do really like the constraint of the short story, and I like short stories a lot like a jigsaw puzzle, without the pieces. So, it's a form I like very much. So.
How does your work both continue and break with the literary traditions of Trinidad and the Caribbean?
I'll take that one first.
I'd rather you did, but
okay. I don't mind. Yeah.
All right, go.
Go. I think actually I'm really glad you asked that question, because when I spoke at Bucas this year, where we did an official launch of the book, and there was a writer in the audience that said, oh my gosh, and I've discussed this with Keith. Oh my gosh, we think you may be writing in the tradition of Southern Gothic. In the tradition of and there is a very prominent tradition called Southern Ontario Gothic, and this particular writer was very familiar with that genre because they teach out of Canada, and they said, of course, it makes perfect sense, because I study the work of a lot of these people. And then that sent me back to Faulkner, because Faulkner was an influence as well. And I began looking more closely at Flannery O'Connor and Faulkner and realized that they were dealing with a lot of the same issues that we have to deal with in the Caribbean. You know, the same sort of post-colonial issues, same sort of, you know, trauma. And what do you do with this material? How do you deal with this material? And I think it's even more overheated in the small islands because if there's nowhere to go. You know, we're there. So that was interesting to me, to be, you know, to be identified as saying, okay, you're actually writing in a particular, you know, under a particular sort of umbrella, which I had been completely unaware of. But yeah, so I would say I'm not breaking in tradition, but maybe offshooting. And I think definitely writing as a female writer from the Caribbean, I do think I'm coming from a different angle. I don't think that there's anyone, you know, I do think that I'm writing in a different way. I don't think there's anyone that has addressed the violence in the way that I have, and that I can think of offhand that's influenced me. I'm sure people are doing it, but I think I've done it by uniting it with landscape.
I'm going to come back to you on that.
Okay.
Keith.
I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, I agree with exactly what she said, and in particular, her book, Sharon's book is startling in, I find, so many ways and on many levels. And she's not boasting with what she just said. I mean, it really is a. I've not seen writing like this. I mean, you see a lot of Caribbean writing these days, but I haven't seen something like this come out of Trinidad so far yet. I mean, yes, there's still other books to read, you know, to see, but this is really striking.
Oh, thank you,
to me.
Keith.
Very striking.
Didn't mean to sound like I was boasting.
And no, it's true, and I think you understated yourself. But there's a sense of Trinidad in this book that really, you know, you could see it in Lovelace. Lovelace does that, and but you know, in his own way, and maybe Lawrence Scott's Witch Broom, that very sense of Trinidad, what Trinidad is all about, that mood, everything. She's done it here, but for now, this is very now, this book with connections into the recent past, and that she pulls up and places it in the present.
Okay. Speaking of Lovelace and valence, in both of your collections, there are various types of valence, which in my readings of writers such as Lovelace and his generation represents a break with the impulse of restraint. What were the aesthetic choices that guided this decision?
You know, I'm not sure. I think it was more, for me anyway, it was an organic process. I can't say that I sat down and said, oh, I'm going to write against tradition and I'm going to write against the tradition of restraint, or, you know, there were things in the society that I felt I needed to address, and I just had to find the avenue to address them. I mean, I think the world that we live in, the Caribbean world that we live in now, is a very different world. You know, and we are the first post-colonial generation then. You know, I mean, my husband is an independence baby, you know. We are really the first ones that we, you know, we did not live under the colonial regime, good thing. But perhaps we're the ones that have to document how dramatically the society has changed. And I think there's no room for restraint. There's no room for restraint in the society when, you know, at least from what I was writing, not in polite conversation, obviously,
right,
but on the page. You know, if I need to say something, I need to find a way to direct it on the page.
What were some of the things that you thought you had to address?
Well, that old chestnut, the narco trade. rapidly changing society, violence against women. I was very interested in reversing the gaze, very interested in that, because I still find that we still respond to the American and the British, any first world. We are still responding to that gaze, and we have to keep constantly saying, we can see you too. You can see us, but we can see you. And the same way you're looking at us, we're looking right back at you. And I make a conscious effort in many of these stories to illustrate that sometimes the cliche can really, be a very dangerous thing. You come into society and you don't understand it, and you don't understand its history, and the Caribbean becomes a utopia for so many people. And I wanted to address that. So that.
Keith.
I've been fed up with Trinidad for a long, long time, and I think in some way that spurred my stories. But that's probably a harsh way of putting it. But you care about the place a lot, and it sort of turns against you, and so you write about it. I mean, I think that's a sort of primitive reaction, a very gut level reaction on my part. And I feel like Sharon, there were things that needed to be addressed. And Elizabeth Walcott has show in her collection, Four Taxis Facing North. She does some of that as well. And I think there are other books that are coming out now addressing this problem, and it's a very serious problem. And so much has changed, in a very short time. And the impact on the island, you really feel it. It just registers in a way that I think is traumatic, frankly.
I want to get back into this whole idea. You said not in polite conversation, the whole idea of restraint, because violence is not new to the Caribbean.
No.
Mm-hmm.
So, but writers of the previous generation, and they did not, address even the violence to war. In fact, in Nepal, sometimes the violence against women is even taken as a joke. But you tend, in your fiction, you're like throwing the doors open and just going, look. So what I'm saying is, what guided this sort of idea that, no, this cannot continue this way. We cannot continue to write fiction that turns a blind eye to this kind of violence.
I think I don't think you can really hide on the page, so it was obviously a personal feeling that I had, that I felt there was a blind eye being the media addresses it, but conversations address it. But I found that I could use landscape, and I could use I had lots of things at my disposal that perhaps allowed this product. Then I use folklore.
Yes.
I use a lot of folklore, some magic, that allowed me to go through those doors without it being, because I don't think, there is violence, but I don't want the audience to think this is an incredibly violent book. This is not a blood and gore book at all. I make a really conscious effort to have, the prose be very quiet. The prose is very quiet. But I think it was a case that I grew up in a different world. I grew up in a world that there was not Naipaul's world, and it was perhaps not Earl Lovelace's world as well. They're Eta,
Yes.
I'm sorry, but they're right. They were writing. They were addressing different issues, equally necessary, more so perhaps,
Right.
but they were addressing what they felt they needed to address. Yeah. If that does that answer in any way?
Keith.
And the question was again?
Well, in both, what guided the decision to actually portray this violence? Because again, even in Jamaican literature and the British influence, one does not talk about those kinds of things. But here you are breaking through, and I'm interested in finding out what prompted that decision.
Sadness, I think, melancholy, anger, hurt, these things, and just caring about a place and people, and growing up again in a, as Sharon said, in a place. I mean, Trinidad is it's a small place, but you can have people living just 10 miles, 3 miles apart, and they grow up in a very, very different way because of their backgrounds, everything. And I at a very early age, I began to feel unsafe, and I really felt I had to, address it somehow, and I never knew I would when I was young. But I thought I would become a painter, but that didn't work out. But yeah, the writing just naturally led there. I can't, I didn't want to write a thriller about a detective and a pretty girl and that sort of thing. Although there are pretty girls in my book and detectives, yeah.
Okay, a two-part question. In both your collections, the landscape is featured prominently, and one critic has suggested that there's an actual sense of the island looking back at the characters. First part, do you agree with this statement? If so, why? And if not, why not? Sharon?
I'll take it. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, when I was writing this, there's a technique. You see it in the Russian. You see it in the Russian novel sometimes, where the landscape pulls back, and there is a sense of the landscape, adopting characteristics. Landscape becomes character then. And once again, that was a different way of me using the landscape in that way. And the reason I keep going back to this thing, landscape, is because I think anyone in this room knows England, even if they visited England maybe once or twice. But they think they know England because England has been very, very specifically mapped through their literature. We've been reading British fiction our whole life. Everyone thinks they know. You say Cornwall and certain things come to mind. And I found in a lot of the Caribbean literature, I was missing an actual sense of place. Like someone said to me at Bocas a couple of years ago, they arrived in Trinidad and they thought that all of Trinidad was doubles and Tunapuna. They were like, they couldn't believe Tunapuna was so small, and they were like, they sell doubles in other places. And I guess, so on. And they said they couldn't believe the savannah was so big.
Right.
And I said, you know what it is? People are reading, and all the Trinidadian works that they've read, they get snippets of the island. There's a bit of maracas and there's a bit of this. So I was very careful in my work to actually, if I'm writing a story, I'm true to the actual place. So that when you arrive there, if you go to Turure Falls will look exactly like I've described it in the book. Because I feel that it's my responsibility to put that into the reader's mind so they will understand the island and perhaps feel some sense of the great love that I have for the actual land, So in doing that, that's when I realized, well, if I'm going to be so specific about mapping and using landscape, landscape is going to have to perform for me as well. It's, I'm going to have to make it work. And that's when I use that technique sometimes. that answers the question.
Keith.
She definitely does that. I mean, she does that. Sharon does that in a way that I don't. I prefer to disguise, for some reason, the island. Sharon is very, very specific and very detailed, and it's fascinating detail. But I tend to obscure things, switch them around a bit.
But why?
I think this sense of realism, of you're portraying reality. I'm not sure that is something that I think it can be done up to a point, and but it becomes something different when you mull it over in your imagination and you put it down on the page, and I think it's a kind of reflection, and it can be skewed, and it's something happens there, and that I find kind of it makes something different, and it takes the too familiar and it sort of pushes it aside, and something happens, and I guess I play around with that, and I don't know why I play around with it, but I see other writers doing it, and I remember when my book went to people. Jeremy told me, I want you to put the real name. I know this town you're calling Sugartown is really Georgetown in Guyana. Right. So call it Georgetown. And I said, okay, if you want to call it Georgetown, go ahead, but I wanted to call it Sugartown, for a reason.
Why?
Sugar. Rum, slaves, the whole thing. And Georgetown is a fairly common name up and down the Atlantic coast on our side, this side of the New World. Well, this side of the world. Carolina, Cayman, all over the place. So I just wanted to, but what Sharon does, I mean, it's amazing. The book is amazing. I can't do that. I don't think I can't do it. It's not. Yeah, it's not.
It's hard to pull up.
It is.
I'm gonna get personal now. Sharon.
You mean we've not been?
And we've live streamed. I was just sitting here thinking we're live streaming out to the world, and what have I said?
Well, this addresses the sort of nationalist, the nationalist. Sharon, you've chosen to live and continue working in the Caribbean, while Keith, you're now in Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
What were the reasons that prompted these decisions?
Well, I'm married and I live in the region. My family's from the region. I was raising my daughter. It was how life worked out. And for a long time, I didn't write. I didn't write for over 15 years. I couldn't see how I could write. I just couldn't see how you did it. I couldn't see how. I will answer very personally. If it's a personal question, I'll answer it quite personally. I didn't see what I could say that could add to the canon. I didn't know what to say. We have the horrendous legacy, and I didn't know, I'm just going to go straight to the point, as a white middle-class woman, what I could possibly say, and how I could navigate living in a place and writing about a place and making it relevant. So for a long time I just didn't do it. And then you begin, and then I realized, well, just do it, and I think that's why. And I don't think living away has ever been an option for me. So it could be that everything that I deal with in the book may seem raw. I mean, and we keep talking about violence. There's a lot of motherhood. There are a lot of babies. Okay, there's a lot of babies in this book. And they all, so, most of them are okay. They end up all right. But there's an immediacy, because you're there, you're living there, you're paying the taxes, you're paying your mortgage, your life is there, and actually, sometimes I cry, as my husband will attest to cry, and I can't write from here, it's too hard. Because it is. You write a story and someone recognizes the story. Of course, even says, is that me in that story? And it can have terrible consequences. It's going to have terrible, terrible consequences. Or someone tells you a story, you're at a party and someone begins to tell you a story and you're like, stop. Because what happens then, it goes down into your subconscious. And 2 years later, you think you've made this story up. And someone says, no, I told you that 2 years ago. And you're like, So you have a tremendous responsibility when you live there.
I forget who said it, but the sense was the writer's family is always doomed. Because
I think everybody who talks to you is doomed.
yeah, because you're always going to be spilling secrets.
You can't help it. You're like, sorry, but it's a necessary thing. You know? It's a necessary thing. It's going to be very painful, and you have to use morality has to be a huge part of it.
Why?
Because you can't. Sometimes stories are not yours to take. They're not yours. I can think of 6 or 7 or 8 stories right now that would make great material, but morally it's wrong.
Keith?
Jobs, really. Jobs, money, making a living. That's the real reason I went to it. But they were, I went back and, struggled a bit and then eventually went away again and then came back and then went away again. And now I go back once a year and visit. So, I haven't lost touch with the place by any means. But I go back every year religiously.
Well, the reason why I asked you this is because there's this resurgence of this idea of the exiled Caribbean writer, and it's been appearing more and more,
Marlon James.
especially with Marlon's winning the Booker and all of these things pushing him out.
There's a violent book.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So I was approaching it in terms of not only opportunity, but also that sense that you brought up of not feeling safe.
And I'm in Kuwait,
Yeah.
which oddly enough, I feel in some ways I feel safer there than I do in Trinidad. But on another level in Kuwait, you don't feel safe at all. Whereas in Trinidad, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about an invasion or anything, which we nearly had recently in Kuwait, although nobody knows about it. Oops, shouldn't have said that.
Live stream.
The writer's always letting out secrets.
Yes, but it's not out of resentment that I've left. It's really just for very practical reasons, and I think Marlon has some good reasons to be where he is in America, doing what he's doing, and if I'm not mistaken, I read an essay that he wrote within the last year where he said he could not. He can't do that in Jamaica. It would be difficult for him to be in Jamaica and be writing the kinds of books he's writing. I may be mixing this up with another reason that he said he wouldn't want to live there.
Well, he said as a gay man, he would either leave.
Yeah.
He would have to either leave by plane or by coffin.
Right.
So
That is exactly what he said. Yeah. And but I really left for very practical reasons, and I confess I have a curiosity to see as much of the world as I want to see before I am unable to do that.
Okay. I think I've exhausted the questions. Anyone in the audience would like to ask questions?
Are you writing to a specific audience? As opposed to,
No.
it seems that, you're both from the Caribbean and writing Caribbean subjects. In that sense, are your readers? Do you expect them to be people that understand the Caribbean, or are you approaching it on a book that, you know, somebody from, like you said, Great Britain can read?
I think that's what I'm actively writing against stereotype, because I want anyone in the world to be able to pick up this book and identify with the characters. So I think that I've tried to make my characters as human as they can be, then, to show that you know, people live all over the world and suffer the same things, you know, same moral crises, same problems, same everything. So I can't say that I had I write for myself, and I'm not just saying that. Then I write to please myself. When the story is finished and it is rounded off and I'm happy with it, then it's good to go. But I don't think of an audience. I'm not trying to please. I don't think. Thanks for the question, though.
At the end of a story,
Did you want to answer? Sorry.
No,
No? Okay,
I agree.
sorry.
You answered for me. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
at the end of a story, are you surprised by what you've ended up communicating within the story frame itself?
That's always a nice feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When it happens, it happens. It's surprising sometimes in a unsettling way, and it's surprising sometimes in a good way. And it's, you know, you sometimes you take a look at yourself in the mirror and said, you really, what is it you really believe about what you just wrote?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, where did that really come from, and what are you working out here, you know? And, you know, where's that thing coming from, that thing that surprised you?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but that takes you back to the short story form as well, which is, I think, you know, that's where it can happen quite frequently, in that small space, or smaller space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in almost all of my stories that has happened, and I've come to the end and I'm going, oh, I didn't see that extra layer. You know, I wasn't aware that extra layer was there until the story came together. So obviously, subconsciously, you are working at some level that you're not aware of. And that is a very satisfying, meaning when the whole of the thing is much more than just the sum of its parts. You know, that's where it becomes really satisfying. It was also interesting when I finished the collection and I realized that there were very prominent themes that I was unaware of when I was actually writing each story. Like I didn't say, okay, I'm going to write these stories and they're all going to, you know, surround motherhood. But there is a theme of people losing babies, losing children, misplacing children, being assigned the wrong children. Yeah, it was a very strange thing. And then I suddenly thought, but it is a Caribbean crisis. You know, we do have a lot of motherless boys and girls, and you know, in the Caribbean, it is a real crisis. You know, for various reasons. But I had obviously absorbed it in a different way, and it appeared on the page in a different manner. So yeah, if it's that, I think that's where the real satisfaction comes from. There are two stories in here that I still can't figure out the meaning of the endings. I mean, I said to Keith last night, we were chatting on the phone, and I said, yeah, there's one story that goes 50-50. 50% of the people who read it think it ends this way. 50% of the people think it ends this way. You know, I don't know.
Making guava jelly.
Yeah. You know?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been reviewed, and then somebody's gone, yes, but this is how it ends, and I'm like, no. And then someone else says to me, you know, so it's very interesting for me to see how people read those stories, you know.
So other than guava jelly and Keith, which were the biggest surprises?
In Sharon's collection,
Yeah. For you. You're in your own water.
Oh, I know. I'm surprised that, not surprised so much of my stories anymore, but reading her book was a wonderful experience, and a shocking one too in some ways. I think that the Jaguar, the
Yes.
near open
Okay.
water
All right.
story, the Marches of Blue.
I
the
was
Marches
hoping
of
you'd say
Blue,
that, because
and
that was my big surprise too. So as in the back of my head, I was like, oh yeah.
and I think that short, nasty little one called Canaima Late Afternoon,
Yes.
very short, only half a page long, that was a bit of a surprise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sharon, other than guava jelly making.
Zanana, Bran and Miss Zanana.
Okay.
You know, right down to the end. I was with Jeremy. We're doing our last Saturday. We're like, so who killed the man? And I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know who killed the man. You know. Yeah, Zanana.
Buying
think-
horses.
Buying horses. Yeah.
Yes.
Buying horses. I think
Yes.
buying horses. Yeah. I mean, but out of the entire collection, I think Buying Horses is the story that I enjoyed writing the most. It was the story that I think I really stretched. I really went in there and I said, you know, I want to break all the rules in this story. You know, I don't care what they say about, you know, narrative voice or I'm just going to I'm going to have, you know, authorial intervention whenever I want to.
Right.
So, yeah. Thanks for the questions, sure. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Is that your favorite story? I'm always curious, which one are you most proud of in the book?
I think it's hard to say which one, you know, which one is. I think it's probably the most important story in the collection. Yeah, I think so. For me, for various reasons. You know, I have other I have favorites for different things. You know, I have different stories do different things, but I think that is the most important story in the collection. It says a lot. It may not be a very popular story, because I think I've bumped up very close to uncomfortable truths, perhaps too close. So it may be a very uncomfortable story for many people to read, but it is what it is, you know. So,
Any other questions? Okay. So once again, I want to thank you for coming out. And I want to urge you to buy the books, because in buying the books, you do 3 good acts in one. You help the authors, okay? Number 2, you support Books and Books. And number 3, you support the publisher, Jeremy Pointing, in England, Leeds, right? Which People Trail become the leading Caribbean publisher. And if you want more books from the Caribbean, and if you want Mitchell and Books to keep on hosting things like this, right? Because they're going to look at the numbers and the Excel spreadsheet and they go, 15, no, that's, right? Okay, so please, and I hope you enjoyed yourselves tonight. Take care of yourselves and buy the books.
And something else to add, we have a wine and other refreshments reception in the corner over there. We have Sharon Millar's new book, as well as titles from Keith and Jeffrey at the counter in the front room over there. So I do want to thank our guest interviewer, our friend Jeffrey Phillip today, and buy a book, have a glass of wine, get it signed, and please give another hand to Sharon and Keith. Thanks very much.